This is Brian Jackson. Welcome everyone to another episode of Lawed Up. Today we're going to be talking about law school, law education, why it's important, and this is for whoever wants to know a little bit more about law education. This isn't necessarily for people who are wanting to go into law school, but more for just informative purposes, people better understanding what law school is, what law school does, what happens in law school behind the scenes, because it really is a unique approach to education, and it's way different than what I went through in college, and way different than probably what most of you went through in college, and how it works and learning. So we'll go through a little bit about that. And I remember one time there was a mentor who I was planning on going to law school, and he said, yeah, it's a great education. Even if you plan to do it forever, be in the law or do something else, it's great education. And I agree with that. It's not just necessarily good for lawyers per se. It's also good for anyone I guess it's good for people in the business world, in the accounting world, even in the medical world, and not just in those areas, across the board. Very important type of education. And the reason is because what the law teaches you is logic. That's what they teach you in law school, is logic. So first of all, there's the bar exam. And the bar exam is mainly a bunch of facts that you have to remember in order to pass the bar. So most of the bar exam for most states the majority of it is multiple choice. And so with multiple choice, you just need to learn specific facts as it relates to the law, the most recent law, and there's a lot of areas they cover under the bar exam. So what they teach you in law school is stuff to cover the bar exam, but also usually what they teach you in law school in your first year and second year, and not the whole second year either, is what you need for the bar exam. And law school is 3 years long, so there's a lot of stuff covered that isn't on the bar exam that you can learn your third year, and a lot of that is just niche areas of law that you may want to look into, that you may practice, but may not necessarily be on the bar exam, or just advanced areas of law like advanced criminal procedure or other areas you want to get a better understanding on. But the main things that they cover on the bar exam is contracts and questions on contracts, on how contracts are formed, how contracts can be breached, and also how certain areas of law like the Uniform Contract Code can apply to contracts. Then also what they cover is criminal law and the elements of criminal law, and how those work, murder, intent to kill, and having that mindset to kill, and testing you on if you know the right elements like robbery or burglary. And then also there's property law that it focuses on ownership of law and ownership of property, and all the nuances as it relates to ownership and disclosure of property. And then also there's the rules of evidence that teaches you in a trial, like how evidence can come in, what evidence can come out, what hearsay is, the exceptions to hearsay. They test you on that. And then also they will test you on civil procedure. So those are the rules of civil cases, non-criminal cases, and the rules there on how to file a case, properly serving people, properly bringing in the right people, stuff like that. And then also torts, which is personal injury, and those areas of law specifically. And then those are the main things they cover, the main classes that they go over. And I go into those classes a little more thoroughly in my other podcasts if you want to hook onto those and learn a little bit more there. But but the main thing I want to focus on is more the substance here and why law school is so good, education wise, like I was talking about earlier. And so the big thing is, like I say, is they're just, when you study for the bar exam, you're just studying the facts that you learned in law school. You're just learning the law specifically. But how they teach the law in law school is very different than how they teach you and how you start preparing for the law exam. Because in most classes in high school and in undergrad, you're just supposed to learn to retain facts and spit facts out. And that's usually how we measure knowledge is your brain's ability to retain those facts and your ability to say, hey, teacher, I learned it. Here it is. You spit it out. In law school, they're teaching you how to think in a certain way. They're teaching you how to think logically, how A plus A equals A, essentially. And in my experience, and this isn't a knock on other professions, but I have found working with doctors in my career that a lot of doctors, they're very nice, and I can see the reward in being a doctor and helping someone that's sick and helping them feel better. That's a very, very good, rewarding thing. But I can also see that a lot of times doctors lack that logic that attorneys do. And part of the problem can be just the human body itself is a complicated thing. And so you have to compartmentalize different areas of the body. So you don't have necessarily one expert in every area of the body. So you have one doctor that is kind of like a general practitioner. And then if there's an issue, you go to a specialist in another area of the body. And so doctors aren't all the time necessarily always figuring out the problem with you, for you. They are looking at it, and if they think there's another issue, then they toss it off to somebody else. So kind of having that compartmentalized areas of expertise can make it so they aren't thinking logically, where they're just passing a problem off to someone else and not knowing what the issue could be, what the big picture could be, what tools need to be used to diagnose someone in a particular field. So a lot of doctors lack that logic thinking like an attorney does. I'm not saying that all doctors don't think logically. I've just found in my experience, generally working with most doctors, they don't have that same kind of thinking that all lawyers do. So there's definitely a different type of education. And with doctors too, it's more learning facts in med school. And then once the facts are there, you come up with a plan to treat it. And in law school, that's a lot different. And so how they do it is they give you a case to read for your homework. So you always have these legal cases that you're reading. So what these cases are is they're legal opinions from judges. And these judges have come up with, there's an issue on appeal, essentially. So there are appeal decisions, and the judges are looking at the trial court and seeing whether or not the trial court have applied the law correctly, and whether or not the facts have been applied correctly. And they're going through things logically with the facts as applied to the law. So they take the facts and the law and they say, okay, well, these are the facts, this is what happened, and then this is the law. And then based off the law with these facts, this is the outcome. So every legal opinion has logic to it and a basis to it, and they can either strike down or affirm a decision from the trial court based off a mistake in law or based off a mistake in fact. And so when I say on the bar exam, there's all of these, you can just learn the facts. You have to harvest the rule, like the holding of the court. So the court will have a holding saying that based off this, we hold that you need mutual, you need both sides for a contract to have a mutual understanding of what the contract says. And so that's kind of the holding. They say this is what, when it's all said and done, this is what it's going to be. This is how it's going to be. And so you have to read an entire case, and you're harvesting the holding and understanding the holding. But in the meantime, you're reading through the entire case, and you're reading through the logic of the courts and understanding how the courts came up with this decision. And so in my law school, they would kind of start out showing the history of the law beforehand. So you would have to read cases on how it was before, and you can kind of see how the case law slowly morphed through decisions to how the decision was today. So all those pre-current law cases are somewhat worthless as it comes to the bar exam, but it's teaching you logic and it's teaching you understanding on how the law developed and how they came to these decisions. And that's pretty much it for most all of law school, is having these cases and teaching you these cases. And they try and do it with every single class, even though it's more, because some are more statutory based. And so there's not a lot of case law on a statute, or sometimes the statute kind of speaks for itself. And also that's kind of where law school stops short, is because they're teaching you to read cases. They're not necessarily teaching you how to interpret statute per se. They never necessarily throw a statute at you and say, hey, interpret this and come up with this. And the only way you can learn how statutes are interpreted is if you get a case before you where a court is interpreting a statute, and you kind of pick up on what the court does in interpreting statutes. But there's not necessarily a case. Maybe there's some law school classes that teach it, but I never came across a law school class where they're specifically teaching you, hey, this is how you interpret statutes. And because of that, again, that's how you pick up logic and you start thinking differently. You start thinking more on the logic side and less on the emotional side. And I think most people that haven't gone to law school, they think a lot about the emotional part of things more than the logic part of things and how it came about. And so emotionally, if somebody gets hurt or if somebody gets thrown out of their house or some kind of injustice gets done, a lot of people focus more on the emotional impact and how that affects them. And they think about, they kind of apply it to themselves and can take on, kind of absorb the emotional impact that that person is suffering from and apply it to them and say, hey, that doesn't feel good. Emotionally, that person is emotionally suffering. Something needs to be done. And so lawyers don't necessarily think like that. They think what the law is and what came to that to find injustice. So there could be something that lawyers find that are completely crazy and completely unjust, and the lay people and most people outside law school may think, hey, that's not a big deal. And it's just how we think about the situation, and that could be because there's some situations that doesn't have emotion involved, but there's a lot of legal violations with how it came to be, which causes people to cry out injustice. So I think it's good for people, even if you don't plan on being a lawyer, if you plan on doing something else, going into business, being an executive, it's still good to have that line of thought and understand, and help you better spot out injustices and problems and legal issues, and help you better understand. Like, for example, if you become a CEO of a business, I think it's very good to have a legal background, be or also making sure that you have in-house counsel. I mean, a lot of smaller companies don't have in-house counsel, but have some kind of legal counsel, whether it be a part-time person or full in-house, and always listening to them and trying to understand what they're trying to say and why. And that can help a business avoid a lot of legal liabilities, so they don't mess up, and make sure that they're legally compliant, and they can avoid a lot of legal pitfalls. And that applies to everyone. But then also just in a lot of scenarios that may come up, whether or not it be legal or not, it helps you think logically things out. Even just in the mathematics world, in the science world, in the engineering world, having that logic background may help you better understand a situation, a problem, and how to fix it out logically, and find a problem, diagnose a problem, come up with a solution. So it really is a good education, thinking logically and going through that process and learning how to do it. And so how you prepare for law school and how you can get into law school, it's not like med school where you need a specific undergrad background. You can have any undergrad degree going into law school. It just depends on your GPA. If you have a science background, that can help you if you want to get into patent law and or help you as an engineer in the future, even if you don't go into law school. And I know people who went to law school and became computer engineers and went off and did other things and became business administrators, and that's totally fine. And you can do that, and you can have a different plan going into it. And sometimes it's good to have that plan and knowing what's going to happen, knowing what you plan to do with your law degree moving forward. And I mention that too because most people have no idea what they're doing when they go into law school. And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but you've got to figure it out sometime. And most people say, oh, well, you'll figure out as you go into it, as you go into law school. But like I say, like with that initial first year, you're just learning what needs to be on the bar exam. And then part of your second year and your third year. In your third year is maybe kind of when you'll start figuring things out. But the other problem too is they don't necessarily teach you every area of law. And also they don't teach you how to practice as an attorney. So when you get out of law school, you have this logical thinking brain, which is great, but you don't have a legal practice mind where you don't know practically how things are done, how judges like their motions made, and how specific courts do things, and how and coming up with templates and motions and what needs to be pled, and how judges like things to be pled in their motions, and how to come up with a demand letter and stuff like that. And so when you come out of law school, you're pretty much raw, and lawyers have to train you thereafter. So that's why it can be hard to get a job right out of law school sometimes, because a law firm is going to have to spend a lot of money getting you up to speed. And so sometimes smaller law firms just don't have that type of capital / resources to getting someone up to speed. And usually only bigger law firms with enough capital to train people are willing to do that, but they're also only willing to take people who graduated from top of their class, or graduated from a top law school. And so someone who may not have that luxury may be a little bit trickier finding a job. And then also there's just some areas of law in law school that they don't teach you. But you may never know. You may like that area of the law. And so that's hard too. Just an unknown area of law that you may like that you've never even had a chance to try. So for me, I've practiced a lot of employment law in my career, and also I took on some franchise law, and I never took an employment law class. I never took a franchise law class, and I had to self-teach myself how to learn employment law. And I took on my first employment law case, and I'm like, okay, I like this. I want more of these cases. And so I started focusing on employment law. And with franchise law, I had to be taught again by a law firm that was specialized in franchise law. And there's no way I think that I could self-teach myself. There's so much red tape when it comes to franchise law. And very few law schools actually offer a course on it. And so most people have to stumble upon franchise law, and then you have to have someone teach you franchise law. And it's very, very specialized niche, very bureaucratic, red tape, lots of statutory stuff involved with that. But I guess the best advice I got from someone, when I was in law school, there was somebody that came and during lunchtime that gave a presentation from the law school. I went to a private Catholic school, and he was a Jesuit there. I can't remember if he had a legal background or not, but he said, just find an area of law where you find justice. And I think that's very good advice. You want something that you feel fulfilled with as a human, because we're still humans, run on emotion. And like I say, most people focus on emotion when they look and analyze at decisions and issues that happen in the world. And if you have that sense of fulfillment, then that kind of carries you and gives you a reason to continue to move forward in your career than just a paycheck. But all other practical things is that sometimes, trials are probably the most stressful things you can go through, because they require tons and tons of data of a case, and being able to flip through that data very, very quickly and that's important for direct examination and for cross-examination and for closing arguments. There's a lot of stuff you have to think on your feet quickly on, and so many important facts that you have to do a good job at highlighting, and so much information you have to sort through and prepare for. And if you forget one single fact, that could really mess you up in your trial. And so trial work and doing trials can be stressful because of that. It can stress you out, can give you a lot of anxiety. There could be a lot on the line, a lot at stake for you as an attorney if you have a contingency case, or if someone is facing life in prison, or if it's just a really big business case where you have millions or thousands or hundreds of millions on the line for your client as a business, or if you're on the other side and you're trying to get hundreds of millions from that business. Just be a really stressful situation. And that's just not the case for trial either. Like other motions that can be like, they're called dispositive motions which pretty much determine the case by a judge without having to go to trial. So a motion to dismiss at the very beginning with a complaint filed, or a motion for summary judgment, can be add just as much anxiety, stress to an attorney having to respond or prepare for that, and the time constraints the courts put on in responding to that, and or just preparing for a deposition from someone, and coming up with the right questions and knowing how to ask the right questions and prep for that. So there can be a lot of stress/anxiety in the litigation world. And then also some attorneys on the other side can just be flat out mean, rude to you, and not very cordial and hard to work with. And that kind of just adds to anxiety, stress, and just, I have to deal with this person for the next 6-7 years. I have to sit in depositions with this person, to go to court with this person. So a lot of attorneys that seem less stressed are ones that do a lot of contract work, transactional work, because it's not as contentious. You're just drafting contracts for people, putting contracts together, and maybe there's some negotiation involved, but it's definitely not as contentious, but can still be as fulfilling/rewarding. And so, I mean, sometimes when you have done litigation and you go to transactional work, you kind of miss the thrill of the trial and the litigation, and it's somewhat more mundane and not as thrilling when you're doing contracts, but it's give and take. But so you want to make sure that you're in something that isn't going to stress you out completely, that you can live with, and that you can find a good, also good work/personal life balance, and make sure that you're not in an area where pretty much your world is just being an attorney and there's nothing else, and there's a lot that's demanded of you. I mean, there are some people that do that and can handle that, but that's not average for most humans. So yeah, it's good to make sure that you're in a place where you have that good work-life balance. But I would say too, a lot of people who I talked to said they liked law school, they enjoyed it, they had a good time going to it. That wasn't necessarily the case for me. It wasn't the most fun experience for me. And the thing about it is, you have to read these cases, and then you have to come prepared to class. And then what the professors do is they cold call on you. And this is called the Socratic method. So they call on you and they say, tell us about the case. What were the issues of the case? And what were the judges talking about and what was the final rule of the case. So you have to get ready to come to class prepared to analyze this case and know the case well enough that you can spit it back to the professor. And I think what makes it so stressful is just the unknown of getting cold called on every day. And there were some professors that were good and they would approach you before class and say, hey, I'm going to call on you today so you can be somewhat prepared. But there were other professors that would just cold call on you anytime, whenever. And so that was the stressful part of it too, is it wasn't just that you had to read this homework, is that you had to read it well enough and understand it well enough that you wouldn't get, you wouldn't look like a fool in front of your peers, essentially. So that's the other downside to it. I think with the Socratic method, you don't have to cold call people. I mean, I guess it's good for people to be prepared and to help them think on their feet. But I think there's other ways to approach it too, to make it less stressful, like that one professor did, calling on people beforehand. And most people, when even if they don't get called on, you can go through the case in your head and you can spit out what you remember in the head. And that in itself is helping you do the same thing as if that person was speaking in person. Anyways, but that's really what makes it so stressful is there's just a lot of reading involved. So you have to stay on top of your reading, and then you have to stay on top of understanding the case and being able to understand and articulate the case. And then also with that homework that you have to do, while you go through, you have to understand the case well enough that you understand the rule. And so you're through time coming up with all the rules of law that your professor wants to know. And then when it comes to time for a midterm or a final, is you have to learn how to analyze that law and rule. And so that's where the logic comes in to play and is most important is in law school, not necessarily on the bar exam. There are some written exam questions on the bar exam, but really the law exams are really where they test your logic, and your professor is going to give you a hypothetical and you're going to have to take the rules that they taught you during midterm or throughout the entire year and apply them. And you have they give you, timed amount of time to respond to these questions. So you have like an hour and a half, and you have to remember everything and be able to go through all the rules quickly and take the facts and analyze them and say this, say based off this rule, it should be like this, or based off this rule, it should be like that. And if you miss any part of a nuanced part of rule, you can get docked hard. So you have to remember all the parts of the rules and how to properly analyze, and understand the call of the question too, on what the professor is asking you to do it, and then put out a proper answer based off the rules without forgetting the rules that a professor could accept. So there's a lot there. So, I mean, your entire grade hangs on an hour or two and how well you were able to log and understand the rules throughout the year. And so if you don't understand a rule very well and or you forgot rule, missed a rule, and that comes up on the final exam, then you could be out. So it's important too on keeping meticulous notes, and you're supposed to fuse all your notes that you take and kind of create kind of a study sheet with all the law, so you're ready to go for that. So that's law school pretty much summed up. Again, it's a good education, but also another factor to think about is it worth it because of how expensive it is? So again, I would I would plan on trying to come up with a game plan on what you want to do beforehand. I mean, obviously, yeah, you can figure it out as you go, but just know that you're going to take on a bunch of debt to go through law school, and so you've got to find a way also to make sure that you're able to pay it off in the long run. And the other thing I would just briefly mention, the one thing you have to do to go to law school is you have to take what's called the LSAT test. And a lot of people think it's ridiculous and really has nothing to do with law school. And it's more kind of another hurdle that people have to jump through to really see if they want to go to law school or not. Because instead of just, oh, hey, I graduated from college, how about I just apply for law school now without an LSAT requirement? So I think that's, a lot of people think that that's a big reason why they still have it. And also a lot of the law schools can weigh heavily on what your LSAT score is, which again doesn't necessarily determine how good of an attorney you're going to be in the long run, and really has nothing to do with what you're going to do moving forward. But what the LSAT is 50% of it is just logic questions, multiple choice logic questions. So they're going to ask you 50% logic questions. So if you want to prepare for it, you should focus on those logic questions. You should focus 50% of your time at least on those logic questions and getting those down. And then 25% is reading comprehension. And then 25% of it is logic games. And so based off what percentage is on the test is what percentage of time you should spend on it. So 25% should be reading comprehension and 25% should be logic games. And there's good resources out there. The ones that I really liked are the LSAT Bibles. Those were really helpful, and you can buy all three Bibles: the games, the reading comprehension, and the logic. And that can help you out and definitely help you boost your score and prepare for the LSAT. And there's also LSAT prep courses that you can take as well. I just did the Bibles, and I thought those were sufficient for me. But I mean, if you really, like I say, they really rely big on what your LSAT score is. So if you really want to get into a good law school, then you really want to take that LSAT seriously too. And you can retake it too if for whatever reason you get a score you don't want. So that's it. Law school, how it works, what it does. It really is a good education and something to consider in going into it. And again, I've gone through a lot of podcasts. I've already created a lot of podcasts that go over specifically what they teach you in law school, kind of like a 500 foot view. So like on criminal law, there's one where I focus a lot on the Fourth Amendment, and then also on torts classes. And those are really good too if you are starting to go into law school, or if you want to know more a little bit on what they teach in law school. I pretty much break down what they teach you in an entire semester in an hour. So those can be really good resources too. And make sure to like and subscribe to get more of these podcasts. And this is Brian Jackson signing off.